Good evening. This meeting is open to the public and is available through an online platform. Please subscribe to the Township of Wilmot YouTube channel to watch the live stream or view after the meeting. Delegations must be registered with the Information and Legislative Services Department. The only matters being discussed at this meeting will be those on the agenda. I need a motion that council reconvene in open session. That is moved by Councillor Fisher and Councillor Fenning. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the Wilmot Township Council meeting of Monday, November 22nd, 2021. At this time, I would ask that we all take a moment to think of our West Coast neighbors and hope that they are all safe during these horrible weather events. We also acknowledge all the first responders doing their part to ensure the safety and well-being of our fellow Canadians. Thank you. Councillor Fisher, are you prepared to do the land acknowledgement, please?
I am. Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. We have gathered in Wilmot Township on the traditional territories of the neutral Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga peoples. We also want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and Mother Earth. We should take only what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant and the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, we are reminded of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community.
Thank you. There is an addition to the agenda, the recommendation that item 13.1 be added to the agenda under correspondence as prioritization of Ohip covered eye care be added to the agenda. That is moved by Councillor Fenning, Councillor Hallman. All in favor? That is carried. And next recommendation that the agenda as amended for November 22nd, 2021 be adopted. That is moved by Councillor Hallman, Councillor Fisher. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. Next recommendation is that the minutes of the following meetings be adopted as presented. Regular council meeting, November 8th, 2021. That is moved by Councillor Fenning, Councillor Fisher. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. First item we have is a presentation. And Mr. Kelly, you introduce.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Armstrong. Council, the following presentation coming from the region of Waterloo outlines proposed service expansion for GRT Route 77. As the covering report outlines, Route 77 service to the township was first introduced as a pilot project in 2016. Due to popularity, quickly became a permanent route as of April 1st in 2017. The township further supported increases in frequency as part of our 2020 budget. COVID obviously had impacts on service and transit throughout the entire region and across the province, across the world. However, with the pandemic end in sight, ridership starting to tick up once again, and regional staff are proposing to make improvements to several routes, including Route 77, as part of the 2022 budget. So with this route being and transit services falling under the region of Waterloo, tonight we've invited Mr. Blair Allen, Supervisor of Transit Development with Grand River Transit, to present an overview of the proposed expansion to Route 77. And we'll take any questions following his presentation. So Mr. Allen, the floor is yours.
Welcome, Blair.
Good evening. Thank you. And you can hear, just to confirm, everyone can hear me okay? Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Armstrong, members of council, staff, and members of public. To thank you for allowing us to give a brief update on the Route 77 Wilmot and an overview of the improvements proposed for the route in 2022. Next slide, please. To refresh people's memories and inform anyone not familiar with the service, Route 77 is a Grand River Transit route connecting the communities in Wilmot, some of them including Petersburg, Baden, and New Hamburg, to the broader GRT network. Connections occur at the Boardwalk Station in the West Kitchener-Waterloo, linking 2 I-Express routes and 6 other local routes. Route 77, along with the other Bus Plus routes, are operated in a contract service, similar, using smaller 19-passenger fully accessible buses. This was the first GRT route to introduce the idea of flex routing and flex stops, meaning that the main part of the route operates on a fixed schedule, but customers are requested to pick up or drop off at one of several predetermined flex stops just off the main route. Currently, those requests are made by phone to a call center, and in the future, updated technology has the potential to provide other options for requesting flex stop for the customers. So a bit of the history on Route 77, as noted before, the Region of Waterloo was awarded funding by the MTO to conduct a community transportation pilot program in Wilmot Township in early 2016. Route 77 began as a pilot in April of that year, running until March 2017, at which time the route became a route funded through the region's budget. And in June 2017, the province awarded the additional funds to the region. These funds were used to extend the service hours of the route. Working with GRT in 2019, Wilmot Council approved additional funds to add a second vehicle for Route 77, improving the frequency and reducing schedule issues. This was to have been implemented in September 2020. However, due to the COVID pandemic, this, along with other transit improvements, were deferred at that time. Regardless of the service changes to come, there are some technology improvements coming to our Bus Plus routes, including the Route 77. Currently, unlike most of our fleet, these vehicles do not have technology on board that allows their systems to track the vehicle location, count passenger activity, or in particular to use the digital fare system or the EasyGo cards. Automatic vehicle location technology would allow customers to track real-time information about a bus's location and better plan their trips while having, next slide, please. Actually, next slide too. Sorry, I forgot to ask for that. While having the handheld EasyGo card readers would help to track usage and allow better integration with other routes. The pandemic delayed the installation of this equipment, and our technology group is now working on catching up. Getting handheld units to Bus Plus drivers to read the new fare cards is a high priority for staff. And so steps are being taken to ensure this equipment is up and running as soon as possible. As early as next month or January for the Route 77, it'll be the first one that we're gonna put the technology on at minimum for the fare equipment, and then expanding it to the rest of the equipment as we're able to. Next slide, please. Pre-COVID, Route 77 generally saw continual ridership growth over the years. Fluctuations in ridership happen every year due to seasonal variations, as can be seen on the graph for the first half of 2019. Then the Ion Light Rail transit launch impacted the whole GRT system. In October and November of 2019, total boardings hit a high over 3,000 boardings per month. Growth was happening across the network following the launch of ION, even in areas such as this that were far from the line, as there was a corresponding redesign in the bus network. This included a number of improvements to routes connecting to the Route 77 at the Boardwalk station. With everything starting to open back up in June this year, there's been a slow increase month to month. Ridership is up to around half of the pre-pandemic numbers, in line with the rest of the GRT and many other transit systems in the province. Next slide, please. Flex routing, pioneered locally on the Route 77, allows customers to request pickups and drop-offs at the designated stops not on the main route. The flex routing continues to be a success. As you can see, some routes in particular, some areas in particular, are well used. In 2019, flex stops usage was about 3,500 ons and offs, with the flex stop boardings that year accounting for about 10% of the route's total ons. Over the past year, the way flex routes have been used is very different, as you can imagine. With places like the rec center closed for extended periods of time and many people not traveling to visit friends and family or doing shopping or medical trips or working from home, several flex areas saw few riders. However, the overall flex stop activity is already back to 2/3 of the 2019 numbers, with another 2 months left to go in this year. And the Forest Hinks area has actually seen growth compared to 2019, likely from a lot of work trips from that area. As noted earlier, new technologies to improve flex route requests are being explored internally, with some on-demand transit software being obtained over the next year as part of another pilot service. The current phone-only option is limited, and this change will improve the customer's options. Next slide, please. Through customers' comments to the Service First call center, some pre-COVID onboard surveys, and recent operator feedback to the top requests continue to be seen as improvements to frequency that the Route 77 operates, extending the routes, the hours of service the route runs, and adding weekend service. We have also had several requests for additional stops on the route. Unfortunately, due to the limited running time, route design, and road speed, implementing these stops is not always feasible. But with more development occurring in Wilmot each year, we foresee continued pressure to add stops to serve the new growth. Operators have continually expressed concern with the time given to some of the trips, and the times are very tight, and connecting buses at the boardwalk is difficult on certain trips. Additionally, with higher use of flex route stops, the stops can fall further behind. Routes that are not meeting their schedules negatively affect all the customers. Pre-COVID, Waterloo Oxford staff and students also asked about trips that connect better to their bell times in the afternoon, particularly heading back out towards New Hamburg. And this year, the bell times at high schools will be altered due to revised class times, and we're getting other issues that we try and accommodate their needs. This may change again with the recent provincial announcement on schools returning to regular semesters in the new year. Our scheduling staff will continue to monitor this situation. Next slide, please. As a result of growth on the route and requests for improvements to the service, the Region of Waterloo and Grand River Transit are asking for your support to add a second vehicle to the Route 77 starting in September 2022. This is basically the same proposal that was brought forward in 2019 but deferred to COVID. The schedule on this slide is the current schedule and has been the same operating since spring 2017. Next slide. With the second bus in the route, we would be able to adjust the schedule quite a bit as shown here. This draft schedule has blue arrows highlighting additional trips possible with a second vehicle. The number of trips on the route can be roughly doubled. They would now run every 40 to 45 minutes. And we would also be able to adjust the schedule and add extra time to portions of the route that require it. Overall, it would also improve the schedule adherence and reliability on the route. To develop the final schedule, staff would evaluate the existing schedule adherence, information from operators, and particularly requests from customers. So any additional feedback from the customers on the route will be welcome to ensure we best meet the most needs. So And so feel free to encourage residents to provide more input. Next slide, please. While some other services improvements are possible and could be considered in the future, staff feel that this improvement is the most invaluable for many reasons. Overall frequency improvements tend to be the most significant impact on ridership and makes the route a more attractive option for customers. It improves the customer reliability of the route and addresses schedule adherence issues, brings Route 77 more in line with the rest of the GRT network, where one of the overall goals is to improve frequency, and it would allow us to evaluate additional stop requests that may come with increased development. We do understand that it will not address all the concerns being brought forward by residents, but the improved frequency is more responsive to the requests we've received and is the most valuable next step. Next slide, please. So the recommendation in the Wilmot staff report and shown here will support the implementation of the service expansion as part of the region's budget for 2022. So thank you for allowing us this time, and we can answer any questions you may have, or staff, turn over to staff and for your staff for further discussion.
Just wrap up there, Mayor Armstrong, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks, Blair, for the presentation. Just from a fiscal perspective, as the report outlines, we currently, the townships levied close to $171,000 as part of the 2021 levy for Route 77. The service starting in September of 2022 would result in additional $80,000 approximately to that Route 77 levy. That's a special area rate to the Township of Wilmot. Service expansion, when it's on for a full year, would total about $230,000, excluding any revenues or transit fares that are collected. So this report is provided to council with the recommendation to show our support of this budget issue paper that'll be going forward as part of the Region of Waterloo's 2022 budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. A couple questions. First of all, what I want to let people know is that Council Gordick is present. Her camera is not working, so I'm assuming that the people outside of those we see on the screen cannot see that she is present. It's just that her camera is not working, so she's not showing up on some screens. Okay, let's start with Councillor Fenning, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Thank you for this report. And, you know, we approved this before, and we're really looking, there were a lot of people looking forward to the increase in service. So definitely hoping to see it move forward. Wondering if you can touch on some of the reasons that we wouldn't be recommending this move forward sooner than September of 2022, which is nearly a year away. As you know, that's probably one of the biggest questions I get when it comes to transit.
Mm-hmm. To you, Mayor Armstrong. Yes, it's a good question. Typically, we do introduce new services in September of any year. That's our normal time for it. The budget that's been outlined and has been suggested is based on the implementing next year, with the roughly a third of the year, which is starting in September. To go to come any sooner would require, I guess, an adjustment to that, and would require additional funds for next year, as opposed to the annualization that would happen in 2023. And from a vehicle perspective, we would talk to our contractor to see availability if that was something that council wished to pursue.
So sorry, just to clarify that, then the biggest holdup is the budget, and secondary would be equipment and perhaps staffing.
Through Mayor, I'm saying staffing would probably be, the vendor tends to be able to provide the staff in time. one of the things is scheduling of the service and ensuring that we are prepared for the adjustments, and we need a bit of lead time for that. Vehicles could become available. We would have to talk to the contractor for vehicles on it. But again, the main thing is budget allocation for it.
Thank you.
Councillor Fisher?
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, and thanks for the presentation, Blair. Two questions. I've had a lot of people ask about the weekend service or the nights. So is there a possibility of increasing at peak times the Route 77 plus add a little bit of the weekend, or like was there any discussion at all regarding that? And secondly, or I guess I'll let you ask that or answer that question first.
Yes, through you, Mayor Armstrong, it is something that we are aware that we've had requests for that additional service, whether it's evenings or weekends. Evenings, again, the short answer is just budgetary issues to expand upon the time that we have. We provide most of the service now. It's a peak service gets the service, and this will sort of extend. We do have some additional midday trips, I believe, in there, as well as some of the, I'm not sorry, just look back at my notes to see. We extend a little bit of the evening as well, not but a trip or so later into the evening with this. Weekends will require, once you do a thing, you need a certain length of time you would need to provide from a staffing perspective, because there's often minimum payment to, like, you got to have minimum blocks of time for the drivers to operate on. So it will be a bit more significant amount. We have calculated costs in the past for what it would be for each of those scenarios as well. But to do anything additional would be something, if we had some direction on that, we'd have to come back with additional information on that.
Okay, my thinking was there'd be opportunities for more ridership, if new ridership, you know, if you created more routes. But and I guess the second question on your fifth slide, was there a reason why there was such a dramatic spike from August 2019 to October, and also the dramatic drop too?
Yeah, it was there's the first part with the ion in, and then over the summertime there were some numbers that were low, but as we changed, we also, some of the service changes came a bit later. In September, we added some additional service changes. I'd have to look at the details to see when they all did, but it just, excuse me, we found that the ion, there was an impact on the whole network, whether it was additional service or just, I think the awareness of transit went up, and that provided that going up. January or December typically slips, you've got the holidays in there, and that tends to have a reduced ridership system wide happening. That then unfortunately in January we had there was a 2-week strike or a 10-day GRT strike, which affected the routes, and it slowed down. It basically cut that service off. You can see the spike back up in March. I mean, February, the whole system was starting to recover again. We had February was much higher than the previous February, and we thought, okay, here we are, we're back on, and we'll get the strike behind us and everything go forward with the expansion we expected. And then COVID hit, and it just tailed everything off. We kept the Route 77 running during that time through some discussions that some of the other routes were cut at that point, some of the other bus plus routes, but it was felt as this being sort of the only service out into that area, there was a need to still keep some service on, even if the expansion wasn't going to go forward. Keeping the service there for those who were relying on it was important to keep. And over time, we saw some growth in it. And watching even some of the flex routes, some of the areas, my expectation is that it was some of the employment that was still happening, people still needing to get to their jobs. So we saw some growth in some of those areas still happening.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gordyke.
Hey, Mayor Armstrong, and this will probably be along the same lines as Councillor Fenning's, but Elmira has a project where they pick up people. And so for myself, the ward that I'm in is very rural, Ward 2, which covers Petersburg, Phillipsburg, and St. Agatha, and parts of Baden that are on the in that sort of rural community, as well as Councillor Hallman in Ward 1, where she covers Mannheim and other areas out there, New Dundee. Is there a talk, or could there be talk of what Elmira is doing with the bus that kind of picks up on the outskirts to connect, so that the rural community can be addressed on this particular route? And is that something that obviously would be a budget thing for us to come back to you with?
Mm-hmm. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Yes, that type of service. They have there's a circulator route that's up in Elmira that we went in and picking up some of the areas and to draw in some of the ridership to the main route there. It's almost a sort of variation of the flex route that we've got on the Route 77. What I would suggest, and we're aware there's some of the other requests for some of the areas of Wilmot, as well as the other townships that currently don't have any service, and we've looked at. Obviously, for all of them, the budget becomes an issue, and we've looked for resources even from the province in the past to see whether things even for pilot services could come in place. We have a pilot service using what's called on-demand transit coming up, where it's a much more fully flexible service in the flex route, where you have zones and people can pick up from virtual stops, various things, using often like an app on a phone, or still calling in to help do that, where there's much more flexibility in it. And the pilot that we're hoping to run next year in Breslau is funded through the province, through Metrolinx, actually, is part of, in that case, to gather information and how well non-demand can work, but also there because of the potential future GO stations in that area. What we want to use is that pilot, and the software that we are exploring with that is to use that as a way to identify the best way to move forward with on-demand transit services. And what I would suggest is that using that pilot to give us a sense of how we can best serve some of these rural areas, and potentially then as we develop the information from that, is develop a bit of a plan going forward, a business case, and putting it together. And then it becomes a question of, we can put stuff in certain areas. Here's what the implications are. Here's what the costs are. Here's what the anticipated demand might be. And then we can work with the various councils and finance people to see how we can move forward on something like that, if that is a viable option.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
I think we should be clear that the loop bus in Elmira was created by the Township of Woolwich, and Kiwanis Transit was a project of theirs that they created to see if it would work. And I think that GRT is picking up on it and seeing the value in it. So I think that's what the next step is from there. But it was a creation of the Township of Woolwich and the Kiwanis Transit. Councillor Fanning.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Mr. Allen, I'm just wondering if you are able to explain what the criteria would be for installing some sort of a bus shelter at some of the higher traffic stops within the township, and if that is going to be contemplated at any time in the near future.
Yes. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Yes, we have criteria. We're actually currently updating our bus stop design guidelines process that we hope to be finished early in the new year, sometime in the new year. I can't remember the exact date of it. And through that process, we're setting up some of the criteria for various infrastructures and the type of stops we would have. We would with this one, and in the past we'd looked at some in the particular New Hamburg for some stops. One of the challenges we've got is just getting the data on specific stops that we don't have in as much detail as we'd like. As we move forward with some of the technologies, that'll help us identify that more specifically. We do have from customer feedback some sense of where some of the critical locations are. And it is something that we do want to move forward with, and using our bus stop design guidelines, that will help us identify criteria and where the minimum location sort of needs are. As we've been moving forward and as we put in stops and as some development applications have gone in, we've been saying, okay, here's where it is and this is the best spot or that's the best spot, anticipating that we may be putting in shelters in the future. So I think one of the things is feedback from the customers, from the residents, as well as through council, just identifying some of those key places, and we can start looking at them. And we need to budget for the potential for the funding for those shelters. We put some in Elmira. We've got to look at through that area. We have to look again, because of the area rating. I've got to look at exactly how the best mechanisms for funding of the shelters there compared to some of the urban areas. But it's something that we definitely want to do, because I know that from any studies say that shelters actually increase ridership on routes because people feel more comfortable at that front entrance to the bus stop.
A follow-up, if I may. So just a rough ballpark, what if you have it, and not going to hold you to the dollars and cents, but any rough estimate of what a shelter costs generally?
Yeah, the shelter itself, and our last one, they're about $8,000 to $10,000 for the shelter itself. Basically that's a 12-foot shelters, which are the smallest size. We go bigger from there, but most of the stops that we would have in that area probably would the 5x12 stops would accommodate that. And then there's the infrastructure such as the the concrete pad that's needed on, and that it used to be $2,000. Concrete prices I know have gone up recently over the last year, unfortunately as everything. And so if you're looking at that, you're looking at probably about $3,300 for the concrete, and the shelters with some of the changes from the last contract. Just sort of got some info that it could be up to $12,000 for the shelter. So if we get around $15,000, would probably provide enough funding to put a shelter in with the associated infrastructure.
That makes me have another question. How long do they last? Total life cost, right?
Yeah, through Mayor Armstrong, they're pretty durable. We've got shelters that are that we've had installed early in the life of GRT itself. I don't think we've got any that are from old Kitchener Transit or Cambridge Transit days, but they're going to last 15 years plus potentially. They're fairly sturdy, robust. The glass is the part that tends to have the most problems where breakage of it. And as long as they're not broken, and unfortunately, if there's any vandalism, that tends to be, again, where the most of breakage is. And as long as we don't have that, they do last a fairly long time. And I'd have to look up what our life cycle is on that. Unfortunately, I don't know that offhand right now.
Thank you for entertaining all my questions.
No problems.
Oh, I see no further questions. You have any follow-up, Mr. Kelly? Okay, so we have a recommendation for you that the Township of Wilmot support a service expansion of Route 77 Wilmot commencing in September 2022 as recommended in Region of Waterloo 2022 proposed budget issue papers at an estimated increase of $80,000, which will form part of the regional tax levy to the township. And that is moved by Councillor Gordyke, Councillor Fenning, all in favor. That is carried. Thank you. Thank you, Blair. And also thank you, Chantal, even though you weren't introduced, we knew you were there.
Yes.
Thank you.
She helps me out quite a bit on this project.
Yeah. So the next item is the Schneider Drain Engineering Report. Ms. Murray will introduce.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. The purpose of tonight's meeting is for the drainage engineer to provide an overview of the drain and provide an opportunity for questions. At this time, I would like to introduce Joel Miller from Case Martin Associates to present the report.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Thank you, members of council. It's good to be with you this evening. My name is Joel Miller. I'm with Case Martin Associates, and I'm just going to briefly give a bit of a description of the Drainage Act report that I prepared and then open it up for questions. So just at a very high level, this was a report that was triggered by 3 different Section 4 petitions under the Drainage Act by landowners of Nafziger Road and Bleams Road. And I have a map that some folks are going to display for us, because in this line of work, it's risky to talk without a map. And so in response to the 3 Section 4 petitions that were received, we went through the standard Drainage Act process. We had a number of landowner meetings. We did a survey of the area where drainage needs were identified by landowners. And so if I could just real quickly give us a bit of a tour, beginning at the south end along Nafziger, right there where the mouse is located. The existing conveyance or flow route goes under Nafziger there through a culvert, and then bypasses those private ponds and then down to the Nith River. So the proposed drain under the Drainage Act actually begins at Nafziger Road and then goes upstream. We consulted with the downstream landowners there, and there was no request to continue the drain further downstream. But from that location, then we are recommending that an existing ditch become an open ditch municipal drain under the Act, to recognize shared maintenance cost and sort of access to a legal drainage outlet for all the abutting lands that currently make use of this private ditch that's been there for many years and privately maintained by the landowners along its route. As we proceed upstream towards Bleams Road, the landowner immediately downstream of Bleams Road requested at that location that the existing ditch be converted into a closed drain or a pipe drain. So from that location just south of Bleams Road and then all the way up through to the south side of Highway 7 and 8, following that dark line that's labeled main drain. The proposed drain is a pipe and will provide legal outlet to the petitioning lands along that route. And then lastly, the other feature of this project is you'll see to the east of this main drain path, there are 3 branches that extend to the property lines to the east, and those are the result of a petition by Morris Good, the landowner for K-Mare Holsteins. And so that those branches provide access to a legal drainage outlet for adjacent lands, and they actually just incorporate existing pipe systems that are there now. And then north of Bleams Road, the work that we're doing is facilitated by the Section 4 petition from Stuart Schneider of AgCom Inc. And then the property immediately south of the highway, currently labeled MTO, was initially owned by Mr. and Mrs. Finney, who signed a Section 4 petition for a municipal drain. So that's just a quick overview of our location. You see the rec center and Schmidt Woods on the north part of the watershed there, north of the highway. And the dotted line, black dashed line that kind of provides a bit of a catchment boundary representing the lands that flow into this municipal drain. So in a nutshell, that's where we're located. That's what we're proposing. And so in terms of lengths, we have about just under 1,000 feet of open ditch that's going to be part of this drain. We have just under 1,700 meters of new pipe drain to be installed, and then about 1,000 meters of existing tile drain that are being brought under the Drainage Act incorporated. So that's sort of in a nutshell what the project entails. And I think 2 final comments I'll make, and then I'll open it up for questions. So the service area is about just over 700 acres. The estimated cost is $622,000. And there was a question that came my way related to a requirement in our specifications for contractors to be mindful of species at risk. So I'd just like to speak briefly to that. That's a standard requirement for all of our projects for contractors. In project locations where species at risk have been identified or screened, or the high likelihood of their presence was identified during the course of preparing the report, that's a requirement that's a standard part of our specifications. And in this particular project case, page 9 and 10 of my report go through the agency consultation that we undertook for this report. So we consulted with MECP, with Department of Fisheries, as well as GRCA. And the sort of responses from those agencies are summarized in my report. The long and short of it is that there were no aquatic species at risk or other species at risk identified by MECP staff as having a high likelihood of occurrence in this particular location. So there wasn't necessarily a requirement for an on-site biologist walkthrough to occur during construction. However, a lot of our projects do occur in those areas, and so that's a standard piece of language that's part of our report. And so I think in this case, though, like I say, the environmental consultation that we looked after during getting the report together is all summarized there on page 9 and 10. So I believe that more or less wraps up the overview I was hoping to provide. If there's any questions, I'm happy to entertain those.
Councillor Fanning.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. To Mr. Miller, of course. Wondering if you can, I'm not an engineer, so explain to me why putting it underground in a pipe versus an open ditch? What's the benefit? Why? And yeah.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's an excellent question. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. There's a number of reasons why landowners are interested in this kind of a project where flow that comes from other lands is put in a pipe as opposed to through a ditch. In some cases, these projects are requested because of ongoing erosion issues with the ditch. So if the constant flow in that ditch has become a bit of a maintenance headache for the landowner because of erosion, sort of routine clean out requirements that they have to undertake, they'll go for that. Certainly one of the realities that we're in these days is that land is valuable, and the opportunity to make the most of your land as an agricultural landowner is an important priority. And so when these communal systems can be put in a pipe and put underground, it becomes a way for the communal aspect to be more advantageous for the folks whose land is the location for the conveyance. So that's certainly one of the triggers for this as well. And there could be other reasons, but I think those are the two key ones: to address erosion issues and more efficient land use.
So what are the drawbacks? I mean, you know, I realize, you know, being able to farm more of your land, I'm a farmer, is pretty attractive. But wild spaces also have value, certainly to the environment generally. So what are some of the drawbacks with it? The other thing that, you know, people ask me when we're talking about these things is the impact to the infrastructure when we're looking at flooding, which I'm sure you have accounted for in the design.
Mm-hmm. You know, that's a fair question. I think one of the things to bear in mind, certainly for this project, if you will, is that the existing conveyance truly is a sort of a managed, engineered system as a ditch through that field that's been dug and maintained and has strange angular corners and bends. And so that you asked about drawbacks, and so the question would be, are there any significant environmental drawbacks, I suppose, to installing a system like this? And my view would be that there are not in a particular location like this. We're not in proximity to, you know, wetland features where we'd be having a negative impact on the water table. We're traversing actively farmed land where you know, there is considerable human activity on a regular basis. So those would be a couple of the comments I would make. I think another piece of the story for this particular project is when land use changes in a watershed that's sort of a mixed use watershed where there's some developed land and there's some agricultural land. The way surface water moves across the agricultural land, if it's downstream of development, can change because of development. And in many cases, we've seen situations where development will control its flow, if you will, with a stormwater management pond or something like this to slow it down. But then that slowed down flow still collects in an enormous bathtub and dribbles out over a very long period of time. That's difficult from an agricultural standpoint to deal with surface flow. So that's certainly another reason why pipe drains are, you know, a good approach in a case like this.
Thank you very much.
For sure.
Okay, I see no more questions from council. We do have some delegations. And the first of the delegations is Stuart Schneider. That's his daughter.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Stuart. Welcome. You have 7 minutes, sir.
7 minutes. I'll get to it. Anyways,
All righty.
Mr. Mayor, councilors, thank you for the opportunity to talk tonight. I guess I am one of the 3 petitioners for this drain. And I guess all I can say is that it's a long time coming. It's long overdue in trying to maintain and improve our prime agriculture land that we have to work with. And I have to commend Joel and K-Smart for the excellent job that they have done. We've been working with him, I think, since 2017 to try and come up with a good plan and have everything looked after the way it should be. The only concern I've got is when we talk about tile sizes and drainage, rainfall and drainage coefficients that they use. I personally feel that we're using historic values. The Drainage Act was developed years ago, and some of the sizes and calculations they use, to me, isn't quite right. It's also changing with time. He has done a very intensive and a detailed study. But where I'm coming from, I stop and I think there's a couple examples I can use. The home farm down Bleams Road, when we moved there in 1978, we needed a 6-inch rain to overflow the creek that goes through the farm at the road. Currently, if we get a 2-inch rain, the creek overflows. I've been watching and trying to figure it all out. It doesn't take much to figure it out. Once we had development behind the castle, that land that was developed back there, the water has nowhere to go but run over top of the ground and flood the creek. It can't soak into the ground there. My concern is with time, we are going to have a bigger pipe in the ground to look after the development north of the highway. In Joel's discussions with the MTO and the report, they talk about potential cloverleaf at the intersection of Knapsinger and 7 and 8. What extra surface water is that going to come downstream with it? I don't know what more I can say. We can look at our situation in BC right now, climate change. We don't get a normal rain anymore, a downpour. And I guess I'm trying to be a good steward of my land, trying to improve us, allowing us to be improve us being a primary producer and the critical food chain. And we want to be good stewards to maintain and improve our land. Other than that, there's another example I can use of land I rent on the Hayesville Road. There's a water washout down through there. When I first rented that property, it was full of washouts and everything else. You can talk to anybody. I've attempted to maintain that properly. We still have an issue. Water is still coming under the road from Stonecroft. I don't want to pick on them or point fingers, but we can't have a water hole starting in the road ditch and saying it's because I'm a poor farmer. So in agriculture, sometimes we feel we get shunted on. We're the bottom of the totem pole sometimes, I think, but yet we play an important role in it. And this is one way that I think I can improve the quality of my workmanship on the farm to be a good steward of my land. Other than that, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Councillor Hallman?
Thank you, through the mayor. Can you just clarify for me? So you're addressing that the size of the drainage pipe is, you're concerned about the size that's been recommended?
Yes, yes, I am.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that for me. Joel, can you comment on that?
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, for sure, the question of pipe sizing is one that Stuart and I have discussed on a number of occasions, and is outlined in my report. The approach I've taken with the pipe sizing that's recommended in my report is based on the current recommendations presented by the Drainage Engineers Guide that OMAFR has recently published. And the phrase that's used in the report and in that guide is a term known as a drainage coefficient. And these pipes have been sized for what's referred to as a 1.5-inch drainage coefficient. So basic idea is we have a pipe large enough that if the entire watershed received an even distribution of 1.5 inches, there'd be a certain volume. And in a 24-hour period, these pipes are big enough to move that water downstream. So that's the maximum design standard that's that's customary, if you will, under OMAFR's recommendations. There was a time before I was doing this where a report for a closed drain might be designed to a 1/2-inch drainage coefficient or a 1-inch drainage coefficient. So certainly there's been a trend to provide more capacity in the pipes over time. In this particular case, I'm comfortable recommending the 1.5 inch drainage coefficient, but I've had discussions with Stuart, and I think there would be an option at the time of tendering the project to keep the report the way it is, but at the time of tendering, to provide a provisional option for contractors to give unit prices for one size larger, to see what those numbers look like. And under the Drainage Act, there'd be a way, there have been updates to the Act and flexibility. I guess what I'll say is there's increased flexibility to make adjustments to the design of a drain at the time of construction, subject to certain requirements that are there. And so I think that is an option that ought to be considered in view of what Stuart's concerns are. Again, I feel like in this particular watershed, we have a number of things working in our favor. We have fairly porous gravelly land north of the highway. We have a wooded area as well, although the soccer fields and things at the rec center are not exactly wooded. And then with Stuart's input and some of the other landowners along the drain, we've actually installed a number of sort of sediment trap water slowdown type features along the route of that tile drain even. So if you will, I'm not going to say they exactly mirror the functional performance of old hedgerows, but they kind of have a similar function across the landscape in the low ground to slow the flow down and help capture it into the tile should it be on the surface. So that would be one option that we could look into at the time of construction.
Go ahead, Councillor Hallman.
Thank you. Follow up through the mayor. So I would be interested in entertaining that process, and I'm not sure if it's deputy clerk or the CAO who someone can help me understand this next process. But I think the option that Joel presented makes logical sense to me. It's financially responsible, and it kind of addresses the concern. Is if we can look at making a formal request for that to be included when it goes to tender to see what the prices would be to go up a size.
Ms. Middleholt?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Generally speaking, we don't give those sorts of directions necessarily in a council meeting. The drainage engineer, Joel, Mr. Miller, he will be obviously putting this, he works with Public Works in putting these tenders out, and that they would be able to work together on that. But usually council doesn't usually necessarily put those sort of directions in a resolution or anything like that. It's more about this is more about receiving feedback, but perhaps Mr. Miller would like to comment further on that.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Yeah, certainly to follow up on what I've said, I think to include increased pipe sizes as a provisional option in the tender is a reasonable approach, and we'll see where the numbers land.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fenning.
Thank you. Now I have more questions after the conversation. So with a 1.5 inch coefficient, what happens when we have a 2 inch rain or a 3 inch rain? What does that look like, and how does that impact the service of this particular drainage? Because, well, we've had those in the very recent past.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Yeah, for sure, Councillor. That's a good question. I think a bit of historical perspective is probably the first comment to make, which would be that under the Drainage Act, drainage systems can be designed to any standard that's appropriate for the adjacent land use. So if we have a pipe drain under the 401, then our design standard's the 100-year storm. If historically and what is common practice across the profession now in agricultural settings, the 1.5 inch drainage coefficient is the standard design approach that engineers are using and that OMAFRA recommends. So what would happen in the case of a over the capacity of the drain is that there would be surface water. There'd be flow following the low ground in the vicinity of where the pipe is buried that would then have opportunities to get into the system at catch basins along the way. So there's provision for flow in excess of the design capacity to have a designated path if it were to occur.
A follow-up, if I may. So, yeah, like I said, I'm a farmer. I'm familiar with what it looks like when that rain, that flow, the low path is across my field. So, you know, I'm sensitive to what Mr. Schneider's raising there on a very personal level. Although this particular drain does not impact my property, but I can very well envision at this precise moment what the most recent very heavy rains did to my farms. So that's where, you know, I'm, and again, yeah, you're the engineer, not me. How long have we been using this 1.5 inch coefficient?
I would need to do a bit of research, but I could make an estimate that it's been more or less the standard practice. I'd say probably sometime between 2000 and 2010 is when it went from 1 inch to 1.5 inch. So it's a fairly recent. I see reports from the late 90s and early 2000s, and even more recent than that are still being designed to a 1 inch drainage coefficient. Because again, the Drainage Act is unique in that there are certain minimum design standards that are expected of an engineer based on OMAFRA's recommendation, but it has a lot to do with the unique project circumstances, as well as the foresight and initiative of the landowners to decide what level of service are they seeking. So just to be specific about sizes, since we're talking about these pipes, just downstream of Bleams Road, the recommendation is for the pipe to be a pair right before it turns into the ditch. That's going to be a pair of 27 inch pipes. And then going upstream from Bleams Road, it will be a 24. There's two branches there. One branch is a 27 inch and one is a 24 inch. And then we'll continue north across Stuart Snyder's farm as a 24 inch pipe up for about half of his farm. And then it drops from a 24 inch to a 21 inch pipe. And we take that all the way to the highway. When we hit the highway, we're actually running partway across the highway road allowance with an 18 inch pipe tying into a catch basin that comes under the highway from the north. So those are the sizes we're talking about. And I guess the other comment I'll just briefly make too is like I say, there are a number of features along the route of the drain that are anywhere from immediately on the south side of the highway. We have these sediment trap, top water capture type features along the route of the drain that are 60, 80, 100 meters in length, perpendicular to that flow path, to form a bit of a berm and to capture water and funnel it into the system should it be on the top.
Okay, I'm sorry. Probably feel like you're getting the third degree here, but you know.
No, these are great questions.
None of us on council are engineers, and we really want to understand what we're doing here. At least, I guess I can speak for myself. I do. Yeah. Now, just sorry if I may, one further question. We are looking at probably having some development, increased development that is going to impact. And as you noted, you know, while that does, those developments do involve structures to reduce the speed at which it infiltrates and enters the waterways, it does eventually enter And so I'm wondering if that's been factored in, and forgive me if that's in your report and I didn't see it, but if you have any comments on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd say the way we took into account certainly the that's an excellent setup question. Actually, I appreciate it. There's a couple of responses I'll make. One is just south of the highway. We actually have situated the pipe in a location that is more or less out of the way for a future cloverleaf ramp design that we did receive a drawing of from MTO. But I think the other thing that's, and this is why I say it's a good setup question, it underscores the importance of good stormwater management. Because if the water that dribbles out very slowly happens to be underground, then it's okay for it to take its time getting through the farmland. But when it's on the surface, it's problematic. And so any of the future development that would occur in this watershed, the existing requirement of the township for stormwater management is excellent, and it would just need to continue to be enforced and requested and required of developers.
Thank you. So we'll take one more question and then we have other delegations here. Councillor Gordick.
Mayor, I think Councillor Fenning just got my question, because I was just wondering, because of our recent discussion last council meeting with the potential to make changes to our rec complex and potentially remove the soccer fields, which then of course would be basically the grass and water drainage, natural water drainage through the field. That would have been taken into account with that, because as Mr. Schneider has already said, he feels that the development at Stonecroft has obviously had some implications on his farm that he rents in Hayesville. So the implications of us changing the dynamics and the land at the rec complex, would that have been taken into account? Because that was just a recent decision. I'm just wondering what impact that might have.
Joel, do you understand what the question is?
What I hear is that there is discussion of converting the soccer field from something other than a soccer field.
That's correct.
Yeah, and so my response is the sizing that's in my report assumes that they're soccer fields, and if they change it to anything other than soccer fields, then there needs to be stormwater management, to make sure that those flows match what they are now, or it raises what is the specific land use that's in play for the soccer fields?
Well, there is a discussion currently on a third ice pad. Mm-hmm. And the preferred location is the WRC at the moment. There's further talks going on about that, but it may, the design, depending on the design, it may affect the soccer fields. Ms. Jackson, you want to step in, comment?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say that it's far too premature at this point in time to even contemplate that. We don't know whether soccer pitches will be impacted. And when we are at the stage where we even, finalize the location for the third rink, we will address all of that. And so will the engineer and architects who do the design. So I'm not sure that it's really relevant for this discussion right at this point, but I appreciate the thought, Councillor, and we'll keep that in mind when we get to that stage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you, Stuart. Our next delegation is Mr. Ross Steckley.
I don't know if you can hear me, and hopefully you can see me.
We can do both.
Thank you very much. I too want to thank the engineer Joel has worked with. In my case, I'm representing on behalf of Mim or Marion and her husband, Bill Weicker. That's the farm on the very top of the page, or the most northerly. And he's made some adjustments based on the fact that a lot of it is gravel pit. I think for the most part, the only concern that I have is that it addresses more or less housing for seniors. This is a couple that there will be an assessment. And so if there's any kind of favor that would allow the family to continue residing there until, say, it was either resold or purchased, their desire is to remain on the farm, and they're of sound mind and body. And I recognize that their assessments are not huge by comparison to the entire development, but we would speak to that more in future. But we did want to note it in tonight's meeting, and Joel has assisted us as much as he can.
Okay, thank you. I see no questions. Thanks, Ross. Appreciate that.
No problem.
That. Okay, that's the last of the delegations. So we have a recommendation that the drainage engineer's report dated September 22nd, 2021 for the Schneider drain requiring drainage for the south part of lot 18 concession north of Bleams Road, Township of Wilmot, be received, and further that the provisional bylaw be given a first and second reading, and further that the date for the Court of Revision be scheduled, and that Mayor L. Armstrong and Councillors B. Fisher and A. Hallman be appointed to the Court of Revision. That is moved by Councillor Fenning and Councillor Gordyke. No further comments or questions? All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Ms. Murray?
I just wanted to make note that after this report was completed and submitted, we were able to lock in the Court of Revision date, and that will happen December 17th at 9 a.m. if anyone's interested.
Thank you. So next item is the years of service recipients. So this is the years of service recipients for staff and volunteer firefighters. Who's going to? Hey, I've got that. Okay. So we'll start off with the 5 years. So that's the next. So they're listed on your screen. Reese Kowalik, Christy Lichty, sorry. Shelby Ingold, Troy Wagner, Sam Murray, and Dylan Dick. We appreciate their service for 5 years, and glad to see they get their 5 years in to get their feet wet. And we go to the next screen is 10-year service. Jason Zaire, Greg Mudford, Shane Bowman, Dominique Trottier, and Doug Holst. And the next is for 15 years. And there's David Tomlinson, Marzina Kutnick, Don Middleholtz, Manny Okrafka, Derek Heimpel, and Brock Dixon. And next is 20 years. Andrew Martin, Lincoln Kuntz, Mike Gilmore, Warren Damier. "25 years service, Terry Gerber, David Beaver. 30 years service, Angela Balsma, Dale Clements, Russell Strickler. And last but not least, for 35 years, Mr. Wayne Zaire. For all these individuals and all our dedicated staff, and sincere thanks for everything you bring to the residents and businesses of Wilmot Township. We certainly do appreciate it. And I think we all need to provide we are certainly fortunate in Wilmot Township to have employees, especially if they're dedicated enough to stay around for 35 years. My goodness. So the next item is the consent agenda. We are now on to the consent agenda. If members of council have any questions and want to remove an item from the consent agenda, please indicate so now, as we will not take questions on consent items unless the items are requested to be removed to the regular agenda. Seeing none. Ooh. The recommendation that report number ILS 2021-43 be approved. That is moved by Councillor Fisher and Councillor Gorick. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next report is the drain maintenance levy. Who's handling that? Mr. Kelly?
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. This report is fairly self-explanatory. As a part of the Drainage Act process, we're required to pass a levying bylaw to ensure benefiting landowners are allocated their proportion of costs on municipal drainage works. So the drainage superintendent has provided the levy schedules based upon the original engineer's report, and we are seeking council approval of this report for information purposes and passing of the bylaws at the end of the council agenda.
Comments or questions? Seeing none, the recommendation that report COR 2021-038 prepared by Manager of Finance, Deputy Treasurer regarding municipal drain levies be received for information purposes. And that is moved by Councillor Penning and Councillor Godek. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. So the next item is an encroachment agreement, Ty Road. Ms. Middleholz.
Thank you, through Mayor Armstrong. Like Mr. Kelly, I really have nothing further to add to this report. Quite simply, it's an encroachment agreement that allows a private landowner to construct a culvert underneath Ty Road and as part of a private drainage project. If council has any questions, we're more than happy to assist. Thank you.
More questions? That is moved by Councillor Fisher, Councillor Fenning, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next is correspondence. So the next item is the prioritization of Ohip covered eye care. The recommendation before you and is rather lengthy. Everyone's had the chance to read it. A mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Fenning, Councillor Hallman. No questions, comments, all. Councillor Fenning.
Through the mayor, I just wanted to comment that for me, one of the reasons that this is really important is that I know there are a number of community members who've been having a hard time accessing services because they're people that require Ohip covered access, and when someone is diagnosed with diabetes, for example, and their vision is negatively impacted because they didn't have that diagnosis and weren't aware of the condition, it can impact their eyesight very dramatically. And lacking access, Ohip covered access to optometrists is a very significant problem. It's something that eye health is health, and we really need to take it seriously. So I'm happy to see this recommendation.
Okay. Thank you. Have a motion. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Have we? So next is bylaws. Recommendation that bylaw numbers 2021-52, 2021-53, and 2021-54 be introduced, read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed in open council. And that is moved by Councillor Gerber, Councillor Hallman. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. And next one is another bylaw recommendation that bylaw number 2021-55 Schneider Municipal Drain Provisional Bylaw be introduced and read a first and second time in open council. And that is moved by Councillor Gardick, Councillor Gerber, all in favor. That is carried. Thank you. Are there any notice of motions? Seeing none. Announcements. Councillor Hallman.
Thank you, through the mayor. I just wanted to let everybody know that Santa Claus is coming to town on December the 4th to the New Dundee Community Center for a reversed Santa Claus parade. It's the same that the New Dundee Optimist worked with community members as well for, as we did last year. So bring your kids, decorate your own car, and come and say hi to Santa and get a socially distanced little grab bag of goodies. And it's happening from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. again on December 4th.
Thank you, Councillor Holman. Could you email me that information, please? Thank you. Councillor Fisher.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, and sticking to the same theme, Santa Claus will be coming to Baden on December 4th. And from 12 to 3. And with the help of the Baden Optimist Club, they are going through town on a food bank drive. And last year, Mayor Armstrong and I took part in it, and it was really, really successful. So I'm sure it's going to be successful again this year.
Thank you, sir. We will be there. Any other announcements? Okay, seeing none. Next item is the confirmatory bylaw. Recommendation that bylaw number 2021-56 to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting held on November 22nd, 2021 be introduced, read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed in open council. And that is moved by Councillor Fenning and Councillor Gordyke. All in favor? That is carried. And then finally, we say the final recommendation is that we do now adjourn to meet again at the call of the mayor. And that is moved by, I assumed everybody, but we'll say Councillor Gerber and Councillor Hallman. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you everyone for attending, and those who are watching, have a great night and a safe drive home. Thank you.